Thank you for attending this webinar with Michael Johnston. My name is Pat Bono, President of New York Bee Wellness, which is an educational, grassroots, charitable 501c3 organization, and its mission is to educate small-scale, sideliner, beginning beekeepers. New York Bee Wellness does have a YouTube site with past in-person and online presentations. We also conduct statewide surveys twice a year for non-migratory beekeepers in New York State, and 2021 is our 7th year of collecting data. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Mike. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Well, anyway, so I've changed the title a bit to Succeeding with Beekeeping in New York State, Dealing with Challenges. When I first agreed to do this presentation with Pat, I didn't realize that we had new problems in New York with a disease coming through and causing greater losses than I had anticipated. So anyway, 2020 was probably my best year ever beekeeping. I overwintered 80% of 373 colonies of 80% of 373 colonies, and that was 44% of them in old standard hives with old queens, and 93% of the young queens in 2 colony hives. And I sold my second largest number of nucs last year and produced 17,000 pounds of honey. That was followed by this spring, where I'm just finding out. Okay, 2021 will be a challenge. So far, I've lost 75% of my bees, and I will discuss that towards the end of this webinar. So first, we'll talk about success, the reason why I've been able to make money with beekeeping. I start new hives every year. I raise queens from surviving stock, and I have mostly young queens in my operation. I haven't had to buy bees from anybody since starting in the 70s. And I've been using 2 colony hives. And when I moved here from I'm originally from New York, but I was in California for 10 years. And when I moved back here, I just, by happenstance, I moved to a very good honey producing area of New York. And I've since learned more about that, being as I worked for a soil and water conservation district for 23 years. So one of the most important things is not having to buy bees. So I was going to go over how you folks can produce your own bees, and I think that's a very important thing. So, okay, and the last success factor is having correct overwintering methods, and I'll show you how I do that as well. So, well, the typical scenario for a backyard beekeeper who has just gotten into beekeeping, and we figure with 30% average loss in the United States, the first year he starts out, he's got 3 new hives with young queens, and they all make it through the winter. And so next spring, he's got three hives again. But May of that year, of the second year, 2 of the hives swarm, and 1 hive doesn't successfully requeen itself. So fall of that year, he's got 2 live hives. By year 3, the hive with the old queen doesn't make it through the winter, and he's only got 1 hive left. So this, actually having 1 hive would be enough to restart the whole operation, but it's just kind of a downhill cycle. So if you're not making increase, then your bees are decreasing, because a queen in her second year is prone to swarming, and quite often a new young queen won't successfully start laying Sometimes a hive will just keep swarming. It'll kind of swarm itself to death, you know. So if the hive doesn't swarm, uh, most of the queens don't make it through their second winter. So advantages of young queens: they're less prone to swarming. They have better overwintering. Reviewing a hard winter in 2010, 2011, young queens, 58% of them made it through. 2-year-old queens, 35% of them made it through. The mild winter following that, 2011, 2012, young queens made it through 96%, and the old queens made it through 92%. Generally, uh, a young queen and a second year queen, second summer queen will be both quite productive. It's just going into the following winters, it's tough for that second year queen. So I'm okay. So splitting hives is the reason why all of these commercial beekeepers are still in business, and many are profitable, and they're making their money from almond pollination, honey production, and the sale of bees and queens. And a neighboring beekeeper of mine who hasn't been keeping bees as long as me, but has been observing things, I've quoted him. He stated, "Beekeepers that make splits are successful beekeepers. Beekeepers that don't make splits are not successful." So the ingredients to a split: you need a queen, you need open brood, um, frames of brood that are open, the bees stay with more readily than cap brood, because the bees feel they have to take care of that brood. You need honey, and you need adequate bees to cover the brood and the honey. So the best time to split is after the bees have had time to grow, but before they have that urge to swarm. And swarm season here is from May 15th to June 15th. And if you're manipulating and you're trying to make splits, the last sentence below is applicable. Everything works best during a honey flow. So I got this graft from Scientific Beekeeping. It was actually from a beekeeper who kept track of this stuff in Canada, but really the growth and the attrition of a beehive in Western Canada is pretty similar to what goes on here in Central New York. So you can see the peak of the population is around June 10th or so, and you really want to, and that's when the bees are going to be most inclined to swarm out of their hives. So you want to get it done. Oh, May 20th or so, or May 15th, and with the unusual year that we're having this year, it may be early May that you want to be making your splits. So where do you get these queens that you need for your splits? Well, you could raise your own queen cells. You can let the bees raise their own using walkaway splits, or you can purchase a mated queen. Most of the queens that you would be purchasing on time for making splits would be from down south, southern states or California. If you're going to be getting queens from down south or California, it would be best to get Carniolan queens, because they'll do better than the nice golden Italians that are better suited for almond pollination than for overwintering in upstate New York. And the northern raised queens, they're available, well, probably after June 1st. So there are ways of delaying swarming, so if you want to get northern raised queens. So the breaks in the brood cycle varies. From a queen cell, there's a 14-day break in the brood cycle. with a natural queen raised from a walkaway split. There's a 25-day break. The bees have to raise a queen, and then it takes 14 days for the queen to mate and start laying, or you can buy a mated queen. So raising queen cells, that's something that I raised here in near Morrisville, New York. There's really two halves to queen cell success. The first half is grafting the larva and raising the queen cells in cell builders. And that's not really that hard. I think that the second half is actually more difficult, having the nucs ready for placement of the mature queen cells. Because if you have this many queen cells, already on the same day, what you really need nucs to put them in that have been queenless for just 1 day or 2 days at the most. If they've been queenless any longer than that, the bees are starting to raise their own queens, and the acceptance of your queen cells will not be very good. So grafting, you want to lift a larva that is the smallest one possible. You can see they have a 1-day larva, a 2-day larva, a 3-day larva, and a 4-day larva in view here, and you really want to be grafting the small 1-day larva. So I'll give you some pointers on grafting. After grafting a bar of queens, you can inspect the cells and see if the larvae are intact. If you don't see an intact little larva there and it kind of burst, you can just put another one in the cell cup. If you can't see very well and it's difficult to graft, I use 3.5 power reading glasses. And you can get reading glasses at the drugstore. Grafting on new wax foundation frames is difficult because the foundation is white and the larva is white. So it's best to graft from dark comb or frames with black plastic foundation. And I use a metal German grafting tool listed in the Manlake catalog. I've had the same grafting tool since 1979, I think. So back when I first started working in the bees in California, all the bee breeders had to produce their own wax cell cups. And shortly after being there, JZBZ came out with these plastic cell cups where all of them have the perfect shape for producing queens. I've learned that the smoke-colored ones are the best for grafting because you can see the larva much more easily than some of the other colors that they have. And sometimes if I'm grafting by myself, I'll put the cell cups in a hive for a few hours before grafting just to warm them up. I don't know that that's absolutely necessary. And while grafting by myself, I'll put the grafted bars into my incubator until I'm ready to put them in the cell builder. Because I might be accurate grafting, but I'm kind of slow. I have actually had a college student working for me the past 3 seasons, and he's done the grafting 2 days a week, and I grafted by myself 1 day a week. And the day that he's doing the grafting, I run the cell bars to the cell builders, because having grafting and moving them to the cell builders is a little hectic. That's all. So the cell builders. So creating a queen cell it happens in 4 days. I mean, it takes 11 days before you can put that queen cell into a nuc. when it's going to start emerging. But the queen is itself is really created in 4 days. So I use a queenless cell builder that I just keep them. I keep the cells in the cell builder, the same cell builder for 4 days, and then I may or may not move the cells into an incubator hive. And the day before they're going to emerge, I'll move them into a little chicken egg incubator. So if you're only really producing one graft, if you make a hive, a strong hive queenless, and graft into the next day, that'll produce really good queen cells for you. One important thing is to check for queen cells after 7 days. You don't want queens hatching and then chewing down all of your queen cells. So, and it helps to, as I said before, everything works best during a honey flow. Okay. So there's different theories on how to set up cell builders. In California, the operations I worked for were just adding package bees all the time and feeding them. And I try to add frames of brood with the extra bees to my cell builders. And I put a frame of pollen on one side of the graft and a frame of open brood on the other side. The theory being that the bees are trying to carry the pollen from across where your graft is over to the open brood. So on the way, they just happen to stop and feed some pollen to your queen cells. Okay, so if you want to make splits with queen cells in just regular nuc boxes, you can take 2 frames of open brood, 1 frame of honey, and an extra shake of bees. And then you can move the hive to a different location, add a ripe queen cell after 1 day, and you can actually do that in the same location if you shake extra bees in there. If you have to, you can put the queen cell in the same day. It helps to shake the bees to the bottom of the box and let them climb back up on the brood, and then they realize that they're queenless. Here's Wooten's Golden Queens, where I worked in the 80s, and they sold about 3,000 nucs per year. They were using a 2-sided hive with two queens in it, and they would actually this was called nuc breakup, and they would do that actually inside, because quite often it rains like heck in Northern California. So you can actually be doing this during a rainstorm, and it was quite efficient. And we'd be breaking up the nucs on one side of a table, and on the other side of the table is a standard beehive, standard single-story beehive that we would be transferring three frames of probably 2 frames of brood and 1 frame of honey into the Houston Ferguson hives. And we would leave 1 frame of brood and a couple of drawn combs, and we would add a sugar called Drybert to each side, and that would give the bees the idea that they have a honey flow going on. And then the following day, we would go out and put a queen cell in each side. So the advantages of making splits with the queen cells: there should be fewer varroa mites because there was a break in the brood cycle, and the queen was never caged and sent through the mail. So walkaway splits. That's a method of letting the bees raise their own queen. So basically, you have a two-story hive. You make sure both sides, both boxes have eggs, frames of eggs in them. And then you just take one box and put it on a bottom board next to the other box. And then you can come back in 4 days, and the one that's raising queen cells does not have the queen, and the one that has eggs has a queen. There's other ways of doing this. You can put a queen excluder in between the two boxes of a two-story hive, and then come back in 4 days, and where the eggs are is where you have the queen. And then you could shake the bees off of the frames of eggs and give it to the other half and move the queen to a different part of the bee yard. Or you can shake the bees down into the lower box and put a queen excluder on and let the bees climb up on the brood. So there's ways of doing it. And so after you've set up the hive that's raising the queen, you can come back after you've done this manipulation 7 days later. And if you have more than one frame with queen cells on it, you can split it even further. So, but one thing I should say about walkaway splits, the half that has the queen, there was no break in the brood cycle. The half with the queen cells, the newly raised queen cells, will have a 25-day break in the brood cycle. Okay, making splits with purchased queens. So you can brush all the bees into the lower box, cover the lower box with a queen excluder, and allow the bees to come up and cover the frames in the upper box. Move the lower box 10 feet away and allow the queenless box to have the field force. Then after 1 day, you give new queen to the queenless hive. So anyway, if you're going to be making splits with purchased queens, well, the queens are basically of two types. You have the southern queens. You're making them with your northern brood, and the southern queens are available earlier. You try to get carnelian queens, or you make the divides with queens raised out north available later, probably in the month of June. So if you do need to delay swarming in anticipation of getting queens after the peak swarming period, if you insert empty drawn comb into the brood nest and the queen has a place to lay, that will really greatly decrease the tendency of the hive to swarm. More so than just adding honey supers on top. So if the queen has readily available drawn comb, then that really helps to reduce the swarming urge. Okay, so I use a 2-colony hive. This is something I started doing in 1979 when I was working for a winter honey farm. And a while back, I did keep some records as to the overwintering success with standard hives and with 2-colony hives. And so I did have over 5 winters, I had 63% overwintering success with standard beehives and 77% overwintering success with 2-colony hives. So there's a little bit more lumber into producing a 2-colony hive, but when you walk into a bee yard with 10 two colony hives, there's more than 10 clusters of bees there. So, well, it's similar to this double nuke box arrangement that is being sold by Better Bee. The difference with my two colony hives is that there's 5 frames on each side of the divider board. And in this case, you have 4 frames in each of those little nuke boxes. And when I first started messing around with this, I built beehives that had 5 frames on one side of the divider board and 4 frames on the other side of the divider board. And I found that the five frame side always consistently grew faster or moved up into the next bee box faster than the 4 frame side, unless there was just something wrong with the queen. So, and it was consistent. When I moved back to New York, I actually built some 2 colony hives that were even wider, that had 5 frames of bees on one side and 6 frames of bees on the other side. And in that case, the 5 frame side always grew faster into the upper bee boxes. So I've concluded that 5 frames per side is really the way to go. So, and when I'm, restarting my 2 colony hives after selling nukes out of them, I only use 1 frame of brood and 1 frame of honey and extra bees. And generally, in the area where I'm located, I really don't have to feed them in order to have success getting the queens to start laying. And the advantages of wintering 2 colony hives, well, there's a better percentage overwintering survival, but very importantly, it takes far less honey to get each cluster through the winter. Sometimes you'll have just 4 frames of honey and a frame of an empty frame of comb on the outside of the box, and they'll make it through the winter. And I did do some tests of the potential. I generally don't run them for honey in their second year. I just nuke them out and restart them. But I did do a test where all of the honey supers I took off, I weighed them before and after extracting, and I came up with I tested it with two colony beehives, and those are the results I got. The way I kept them from swarming is I would pull brood out of the second story, put the brood above a queen excluder, and I didn't really have drawn comb to work with. I would put foundation in it, and if there's a good honey flow, they'll start drawing the comb out really fast, and the queen will be laying in it in short order. So this is a little deceiving. It says 2 colony hives can produce very large broods in May. Well, standard hives can produce very large broods in May as well. I think maybe there's a little more tendency for 2 colony hives to produce large broods. That's a 2 colony hive that's being split in the middle, and there's 2 standard hives on either side. So,
Mike, there is a question.
okay.
When overwintering these, do the double nuke boxes include a second nuke box above, or the double refer to just one box double wide above?
There's a diagram of it. Yeah, I overwinter it as a 2-story hive, and I mean you can go 3 stories and 4 stories with brood going all the way to the top. These really big hives here the brood, the queen was restricted to the two lower boxes. Each queen had 10 frames to lay in. And there was a queen excluder above that, and there was just honey above there. So yeah, so it doesn't go through the winter as just a single story, two-sided hive. It goes through the winter as a two-story, two-sided hive. So I hope I answered that, Pat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Another opportunity to make increase is when you catch your bees trying to swarm. So Roger Morris was a very great teacher here in New York, and he would say that once a hive gets the urge to swarm, there's nothing that can be done to change it. And I would say that's not really true. You can take, if I have had occasion to find hives that were just getting started in the swarming process, I would take the queen, put her in a different box, and move her to a different part of the bee yard. Then I would allow the hive to raise its queen cells, and you can split the queen cells up into multiple beehives. I know I have split a standard hive with queen that was about to swarm. I did split it 5 ways. One of the ways would include the queen that got set off to the side. So the tricky part is not crushing the queen cells, because the queen cells tend to be hanging from the bottom of the frames. And so that is kind of tricky. I have actually split them where some of the queen cells were in a second hive body rather than just the single hive body on the ground, just so I wouldn't crush the queen cells. Okay. Well, I was going to just touch on one of the elements of succeeding is just being in the right place in New York. Different locations in New York are better for beekeeping than others, and it has a lot to do with the soils. This is a quote from Honey Plants of North America, a book from 1926, but it's really a great book. And the author was actually quoting another man, and says the best locations for beekeeping in New York are very irregularly distributed. As one beekeeper expresses it, the best locations occur in pockets. And it says, of the outlook in New York, men of wide experience are having good success, but there are many failures. So this is one generalized soils map of New York. Here's another one, and I'll explain the different soil orders a little bit. There are 12 soil orders. The classification of soil is similar to the classification of plants. I think they modeled it after the classification of plants. In soils, they have orders and suborders, and they have other classifications below that. Whereas plants, you have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And so, but anyway, the 12 soil orders, I've highlighted the ones that are most important to us in New York, as well as one that's not necessarily very important to us New York beekeepers: the entisols, the inseptisols, the mollisols, the spotisols, and the alphasols. And I'll explain a little bit about each one. The mollisols are the prairie soils, and you can see why there's like a beekeeper gold rush headed to North Dakota from after the almond pollination, because the mollisols are really the most productive soils in the world. Um, we have them here in the United States. You also have them in Ukraine. And if you have a soils map of the whole world, you can see where the most productive food producing regions are according to the different soil orders. So, but that's the reason why all these beekeepers head to North Dakota. You can see the concentration of these prairie soils there. And the alpha soils, they're more important to New York State. They talk about the clover belt. The clover belt goes from Minnesota across the Midwest over to New York State. And the clover belt is where the alpha soils are located. And so that map is a little bit better representation, shows you where the alpha soils are in New York. And they're on the Lake Plain, and they are on the what they call the Hildeberg Escarpment in New York, which is underlaid by limestone and the glacial till that got scraped off of it. It's so north of Route 5 is relatively flat, and south of Route 5 is that big hill that is underlain by limestone. So the alpha soils are naturally fertile soils, and they have a high pH. And the main honey flow comes from basswood, knapweed, and clover in the summer months. So if you start hives in May and June, they will have a good honey flow throughout the summer, and you probably won't need to feed them. And I really have never had to feed hives. The only hives that I ever feed really are what's going on here? Okay. Huh.
Oh, you're okay.
Okay. I think maybe somebody tried to make a phone call or something. Okay. And so then you also have the inseptisols. Those are located south of the alpha sols, and they're the Allegheny Plateau, Black River, Mohawk River lowland, and it's glacial till from sandstone, siltstone, and shale. This has got a lower pH. It's more of an acid soil. They are young, fertile soils. They're still good soils. The clover and the knapweed doesn't yield very well on them. It's historically, whereas the alpha soils were known as the clover belt, this is more known as the buckwheat region. And you get great honey flows from goldenrod, but there is a dearth in the honey flow between the end of the basswood and the beginning of the goldenrod. So new hives may need feeding if you have them in that area. So the entasols. The entasols are actually the most widely distributed soil order in the world. I think has a lot to do with the fact that the Sahara Desert is one big entasol. But in New York State, entasols are soils that have been displaced from one place to another by reason of water movement or wind. So you can see they're placed in the river valleys here in New York. So those are fertile soils, but they're also great areas for growing corn and soybeans. And I think we all know about problems with neonicotinoids. So And then the spotozoals. The spotozoals are not a good place for beekeeping. Um, that's in the Adirondacks. I kind of refer to the Adirondacks as being the dead zone for beekeeping. Um, and the Tug Hill Plateau. And according to Honey Plants of North America, you get a decent honey flow in the Adirondacks from raspberry. And I would assume that's also true of blackberry. So I'm a little bit confused about the spotozoals. Going by this map, it looks like the Tug Hill Plateau, which is just west of Lake Ontario, is a big chunk of spotazole. But according to this map, it's more likely to be a inseptisol. So you'd have to talk. So my advice is to get familiar with your county's soil survey and look at the different soil types. And there's tables in there that will tell you which soils are fertile or the productivity of different crops on the different soil types. And if the crops are, if things are just not very productive, you know that those are not very good soils. So that's a quick review of the soils in New York. So overwintering. Well, there's a lot of different thoughts about overwintering here in New York. I would recommend that everybody read this article that was in the American Bee Journal, Top Ventilation and Top Entrances. Well, actually, you can't quite see the whole title. It's Honeybee Engineering. Oops. Honeybee Engineering. I'm sorry. Honeybee Engineering, Top Ventilation and Top Entrances. It's from the August issue of August 2017 of the American Bee Journal. And here's some important points from that article. Brood needs greater than 75% humidity for development. And if you just put an entrance at the bottom of the hive and one at the top of the hive, that creates a draft through the hive that will dry out the brood. And cold condensation raining down on bees occurs in hives with high heat loss. So, and moist air is possible without condensation if the hive is insulated so that surfaces above the bees are above the dew point. So I'll show you, I'm not going to show you yet. So lowering the upper entrance and insulating the hive above the vent, or the upper entrance, as we say, allows for a warm, moist environment for brood development without condensation. And so this is how I do it. I restrict the lower entrance so that, you know, so you don't get robbing from other bees and you don't get too much air coming in. And then that hole that is drilled in the second hive body, this is a 2-colony hive, by the way. The hole that's drilled in the second hive body is about a 7/16 of an inch hole that I drilled. It's greater than 3/8 of an inch. And then I insulate the top of the hive. What you see above the second story, immediately above the second story, is actually a spacer. And the reason it's there is because I was giving them pollen supplement. But ordinarily that wouldn't be there going through the winter. So that's how I do it. And I've been enjoying pretty good success with doing it that way. So anyway, now we get to the bad news, the challenges of beekeeping. So the challenges are related to disease. So This is a definition of disease. And so there's different disease agents. They can be biotic or they can be abiotic. It could be just drought conditions where there's no honey flow. That'll cause the beehive to die, and would be considered a disease as well as all of these living organisms that are attacking your beehives. So anyway, when I was taking forest and shade tree pathology back at ESF in the 70s, they taught us that you have three different kinds of disease factors. Well, it's not absolute, but it's just a convenient way of looking at it. You have predisposing factors, you have inciting factors, and you have contributing factors. Predisposing factors will weaken the organism. The inciting factors are the disease factors where you actually start seeing disease symptoms, and contributing factors are additional things that just pile on and help to get the organism even more sick. So here's some examples of predisposing factors. Inciting factors. These are the ones that make the disease symptoms come about. And contributing factors. Some beekeepers will tell me that their hives died of wax moth, and I'll tell them, well, no, they probably didn't die of wax moth. They died of something else, and then the wax moths piled on. So anyway, my first problem when I moved here from California was American foulbrood. And I've always worked with the bee inspectors here in New York. So we had to burn the frames that had the foulbrood cells. And I treated according to the recommendations of a retired beekeeper, or a retired bee inspector, I should say. And that year I didn't extract any honey. So once you see one hive in your yard with American foulbrood, you better get on. You should definitely get a prescription for terramycin from your veterinarian, so you're allowed to use an antibiotic. And the recommendation I got from the retired bee inspector was, he said, don't use a tablespoon of terramycin, use a tuna fish canful. So that's probably a shocking thing for many people to hear. But until I started doing it that way, I kept getting new cases of foulbrood. So in 1992 was the advent of Varroa in New York. And I started using Apistan. I had enough warning that we were going to have a problem with Varroa. So that first winter, I had 30% overwintering success, and I grafted from the survivors and made splits. And by July, I had around 100 hives in. By July, I had gotten everything restocked. And in 1998, I had one yard which I didn't manage to get the Apistan onto, and there was one hive that survived from that untreated yard, and that was my only breeder queen that year. In 2004, I stopped treating because I found that the hives that were untreated were coming through the winter better than the ones that were treated at that point. Okay, so in the next the next disaster we had in beekeeping was colony collapse disorder. And so the question is, why did we have this coincidence of Nosema ceranae, colony collapse disorder, and the neonicotinoids all at the same time in 2006? This is from Scientific Beekeeping, Randy Oliver again. And this is when you can see when the samples being sent into Beltsville Bee Lab started going up with positive tests for Nosema, and that was that low point just before the rise was 2006, and after that it just went haywire. So Nosema ceranae was endemic in the United States after 2007. In my own operation, I had tested for Nosema in 2007, and I had a 0 spore count. That was in August. And I tested for Nosema in August of 2009, just 2 years later, and I had high levels of Nosema spores. So I knew that between 2007, 2009 is when Nosema ceranae came through here as well. Did I skip one? Okay. So they only started using neonicotinoids around 1991, and they became widespread after the year 2000. So the reason why the chemical companies like them is because they're extremely effective on insects, and they don't have much effect on mammals, you know. So anyway, this was some research that was done. At the very bottom, it says here, one man studied neonicotinoids and Nosema together. They found that the combination of the two of them together caused the highest mortality in food consumption. So when you put the two of them together, that's when you have the greatest loss. And the symptoms are the bees really have a hard time finding their way back to the hive. So, you know, so you end up with these beehives where you have a queen and, 50 bees left after exposure to these diseases. So Nosema ceranae was in the United States. They actually found samples, I believe they found a sample in 1980 that actually they went back and looked at, and there was a sample with Nosema ceranae, but it didn't really spread until the neonicotinoids were actually being used commonly in the United States. So anyway, I have had mixed results overwintering since then. 2014 and 15, I had 56% overwintering. I did manage to, so I had 153 hives left, 153 colonies left in the spring of 2015. And I did manage to increase that to 466 colonies, including the nucs that I sold. 2016 and 17, I had 38% survival. I still sold 337 nucs, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to find the records of how many beehives I had at the end of 2017. So anyway, 2020, I'm thinking that I've got this figured out. And when Pat asked me to give a presentation, the title was Successful Beekeeping in New York. So little did I know that 2021 was going to be probably the biggest challenge yet of my beekeeping career. So far, I've lost 75% of my bees, and they're not done dying yet. And I believe it's probably caused by a virus that's carried by Varroa. Speaking to neighboring beekeepers that did well this past winter, I talked to a beekeeper in Syracuse that he had 90% overwintering success. He only used one miticide, and that was oxalic acid. He did that in May, August, September, and late October. And that's not supposed to work, according to a very well-respected friend of mine that knows more about this stuff than me. He says using oxalic acid when there's cap brood isn't going to work because it doesn't kill the mites that are under the cap. So, but apparently this guy was able to do it. There was a beekeeper in the Ithaca area with 90% overwintering. He treated for mites whenever his bees tested for 2 mites per 100. And another beekeeper I know with 75% overwintering, he did 2 mite away quick strip treatments, one in August and one in October. So I have a mystery of 2 bee yards. We have the Stone Brothers yard on the left and the Berry yard on the right. Those were the summer yards, and I moved both of those yards. I moved down to the Andy Swizik yard, so they're actually in the same yard together. The Stone Brothers yard, all of the hives died, and the summer yard is on a dairy farm. It's close to corn. I don't know what breeder queen. I didn't really keep track of the mothers of the queens in those hives. And strangely enough, it's only located about a mile away from the berry yard. The berry yard is also being wintered in the Swizik yard. So far, it's had 41%, 41 out of 51, or 80% overwintering. The summer yard has very little corn in close proximity, and I guess in the future I'll have to keep better track of some of the breeder queens anyway. So here we have hives. This is a row of hives from the Stone Brothers yard. They have an S. When we moved the bees, I just happened to put an S on the hives from the Stone Brothers yard and a B on the hives from the Berry yard. I wasn't, with no particular reason, I just did it, not knowing that whether it would be important or not. But these are all hives from the Stone yard, and they're all dead. And in the same yard, we have the hives from the berry yard. We have 2 colony hives. That's a standard hive, and with the lids off, and all of those hives are alive. And so I'm not sure why these hives made it and the other hives didn't. They were really treated in a similar manner. So my helper Tim and I were joking. So for the hives with the B on it, that's for very good overwintering, and the hives with the S on it is a sad situation there. So anyway, so what's my strategy for recovery? So I'm going to select breeder queens that show resistance, and I'm not going to treat the breeder queens. I'm going to grow the rest of the surviving bees as fast as possible. I'm going to treat those with miticides and take brood from these surviving hives for splits. I'll treat most of the new hives with miticides because I need to have bees to work with next year. But I'll have a sample population where I will not treat them, and I'll mark these hives with the name of the breeder, see if I can really develop any stock that is resistant to this new disease. And strategy for recovery is somehow I'm going to have to deal with the honey that is left behind in the dead hives. I talked to some people that actually extracted this honey. It seems like a lot of the honey in the hives of mine that are dead are a lot of that honey is crystallized. And so when you go to extract frames that are crystallized, you're getting a honey with a higher moisture content, because that stuff that crystallizes, that's pure sugar. The water does not crystallize. So you have to be careful extracting honey like that. If I can get it onto new hives before the hive beetles can get into it, that would be ideal. And I can also set the boxes out and try to get them robbed out. And so in 2022, I'll try to repeat the process that is outlined here. So see what we can do. And there's no guarantees of success. The big question is, will using frames of honey from dead outs infect surviving hives with the deadly disease that's killing off the hives I have now? So there's hopeful
Mike,
signs. Yeah.
Mike, do you have any idea whatsoever what kind of virus, maybe paralytic or any guess or?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about deformed wing virus, and that's what everybody has been talking about. And I mean, I had my hives analyzed by the Bee Informed Partnership 2016 to 2018, and all of those viruses were in my hives. It's just a new variant of them. I mean, now that we've been through this pandemic, we're getting used to hearing about variants. So I think it's just a new variant of the virus coming through that's kind of caught me by surprise. So, okay. So I do have some hopeful signs. Here's a hive that I put a third story on, and one day later, the bees were moving up into the third story and working the third story. So when these ones get full of bees, 4 stories high, and full of brood, Peter Boris likes to call them towers of power. So they can be a very powerful hive, producing a lot of brood. So, and well, there's one that just before I add the third story, and I've been feeding pollen supplement. This is such an amazing spring. We've never had, this is the earliest spring I've ever seen. And so the bees are bringing in lots of pollen. The pollen supplement isn't really necessary. And if you see very many hive beetles, it's a bad idea to feed pollen supplement when they're already bringing in pollen off the trees, because the hive beetles love pollen supplement also. So, and here's a potential breeder queen. This is just one side of a 2-colony hive. I had marked it last August. Very good hive. This side, 20. So, and it's coming through the winter looking really strong. The other half of that hive is not too jet hot, but it may not make it. But it looks like that one side has good potential to be a breeder queen. So, okay.
All right, so there's a few questions about the two colony hive. Um,
Sure.
One is, how wide is a divided 10 frame box? Is it 16 1/4 inch or wider than that?
That's 18 inches wide. With there's a 3/4 of an inch divider in the middle, and actually, you know, I threw a lot of stuff here. So,
Here you go.
and actually, the way I build it now is I have a groove that the divider board fits into, and it can move up and down because I have had a little bit of problem sometimes with the shrinking and the swelling. So if the divider board can actually move and meet that bottom divider board, it'll seal better. They the queens very rarely go over the top, but if there's a space in between the two boxes, they'll try to go through that. So, but anyway, it is 18 inches wide. So,
Okay,
with
and
five,
in your overwintering configuration, there was not entrance at the top above the second story. You only had the 16 inch hole in the middle,
yeah,
no upper entrance at all or gap.
no upper entrance at all. Yeah, because well, I, well, as the guy says in the article, an entrance at the bottom and at the top, it creates a draft through the hive that dries out the brood. And actually, the bees prefer a high humidity environment for their brood. So I knew that would be a revelation to people. But yeah, it's I've been having good success with just a drilled hole in the second hive body. I mean, going by what it says in the article, you should insulate it, the whole box above that hole, but storing all this insulation is a problem, So,
Okay, so the
so
entrances are on the opposite sides. One person asked, from what I see, it doesn't matter what direction the entrances are facing.
um, I'm not sure what they mean by that. Oh, I mean, whether it's facing south towards the sun or facing
Right.
uh, that sort of. No, not really. It doesn't seem to matter. Um, I talked to one beekeeper that he wrapped a bunch of hives, and the ones that were facing north did better for him that particular times than the ones facing south. So,
Someone asked about that beekeeper in Syracuse that treated his hives with the oxalic several times. So was that one treatment per occurrence? Do you know, or
well, he treated them just one time in May, and one time in August, one time in September, and one time in late October. So they got 4 treatments over the course of the year.
okay, thank you. One question here about moisture. They said I lost one hive last year, last winter due to moisture. This past winter I added a heat box, which keeps heat in and is supposed to circulate moisture out, and I lost that hive as well. I plan on moving the hive to a different area of the yard. Any suggestions?
Oh, well, uh, I'm just telling you how I do it. I mean, you
Right.
can you can follow my lead or not. I mean, just bees have so many reasons for dying, so, but yeah, I don't see any reason to supply extra heat to the bees. He said that he gave them a heat box. He was actually warming the hive.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the bees do produce a lot of heat themselves, and one of the advantages of the two colony hive is that each cluster is uh, keeping warm a much smaller space than a standard hive. Okay. Any other questions?
Do you close the hole in the bottom of the hive for winter?
No, I reduce it. That you can, that little piece of wood on the bottom, I leave an opening wide enough to stick a hive tool in there if I need to stick a hive tool in. That's my measure for the bottom entrance, is the width of a hive tool.
One person says the only advantage I see of the double disadvantage I see of the double colony is that if you slant the box for drainage, it has the opposite effect on the other side.
Well, and the way I've solved that is with the bottom boards I have, they are actually, the landing board is lower than the entrance. I've, so it takes a little bit more work to build the bottom board that way, but I take a dado blade on uh, either side of the bottom board, and I cut it lower on the edge where the you know than where the box is going to sit. This green bottom board that you're looking at, I only did it. I got kind of fancy, and I only did it for half the length of the bottom board, and I realized that there's no need to do that. I just cut a dado across the whole bottom board there. If you kind of look at the side of the bottom board, just kind of below that B, where you can see that it's the part that the box is on is a little bit higher than actually the landing board for the bees. So that prevents water from running in.
Okay, another question. Now you kind of answered the one about the viruses. You thought, it could have been deformed wing viruses. One person asked, did you treat for varroa last year?
Uh, I haven't treated for varroa since 2004. So and I have a neighboring beekeeper that doesn't treat as well. Um, but I guess I'm gonna have to at least treat some of my hives in this coming year, so I have some bees to work with. I can't risk losing them all again like that. And the berry yard, maybe the virus just hadn't spread there yet, so I gotta do things a little differently. I'm still looking for disease-resistant bees, but you can do that with part of your operation. You don't have to do it with your whole operation.
Okay, so I want to ask, when were you at ESF? What year?
Oh, I graduated in 1977. And I think my forest and shade tree pathology teacher was Tibor Zabo at the time.
One person types in, thank you for sharing this, Mike. Your 2020-2021 experience closely resembles my experience in Minnesota. It's very discouraging, but I share your optimism for rebuilding.
Yeah, and well, and I'm 67. I'm collecting Social Security, and and a pension from the state job that I had. So I'm not going to starve to death, you know. So I'll do my best to recover, and it it'll be more work but less money this year probably.
All right, and one more question here. Well, two questions. Do you do regular mite testing?
Well, I haven't tested enough. That one hive there that I was using as an example of a possible breeder queen, we tested that one 2 days ago, and that had one mite in a 300 bee sample. And I did test hive, my breeder queens last year, um, and we had it went from 0.67 mites per 100 up to all the way up to 8 mites per 100. But all of those breeder queens didn't make it through. Uh, so anyway, but I would say as a warning, if you haven't had really bad losses yet, you better do a good job of treating for mites this year. Anyway.
Okay, one last question. Someone asks,
Sure.
where can I get a 2-colony hive?
Well, I'll tell you, I tried to sell them 3 times, and I guess I'm just not a very good salesman, because I was spending more money on advertising than I was making, so I kind of gave up on trying to sell these beehives. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you can buy those hives with the double nuke boxes from Better Bee, or you can make some